Hello, fellow warriors, and welcome to Skyhold Talks Episode 2, The Fury Show. I'm Naeno, a moderator of the Skyhold Discord and a current raider for HC on Burning Legion US.
Hi, my name is Archimtiros. I'm the lead warrior theory crafter and guide author, currently raiding in Affinity on Manaroth.
Hi guys, I'm Capcake. I'm a hardcore raider in Big Dumb Guild on US Illidan.
Alright, how you guys doing today?
Good.
Pretty good. Just enjoying my Saturday.
You guys know raiding this Friday? Or Saturday? It is Saturday, wow. Mythic Week has gone by real quick, hasn't it?
It's not over for me.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, it's not over for me either. I have an extra raid day on Monday. Where are you raiding? Archie and Sunday?
Yep, we'll be raiding tomorrow, going after Desolate Host to try to get 5 before the weekly reset.
Is that a normal raid day for you, or just is it one of those added, like the first week of progression type of things?
So my guild's kind of interesting. Instead of doing splits, because most of the raiders in my guild kind of agreed we don't want to deal with alts and all that stuff, we've decided that we would instead raid 2 extra days on the first 2 weeks of Mythic in lieu of splits. So instead of getting all that extra gear from splits, we just put a little more extra time into doing Mythic those first couple weeks so that we get all the easy stuff out of the way and we have more time for actual progression bosses.
Yeah, you see, my guild does the same thing, except it's only 1 extra day, and not 2. But yeah, I mean, with you having 2 extra days, you basically, because you're a 9-hour guild normally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, okay, that works out. And then Cap over here, you did both, didn't you? Splits and a lot of raiding.
Yeah, this time around, everyone just decided that we wanted to try day raiding and see what it was like. We had a lot of fun doing it, and it obviously wasn't like mandatory. If you couldn't make it due to real life stuff, it's not like officers were holding a gun to your head or anything. But we tried it out. We had a lot of fun. Got a Desolate Host down world first, and that was really cool.
You guys picked up a lot of new people from Spitus and Friends, right?
Yeah, we did.
That was kind of that used to be their thing, right? They were really well known for day raiding, so it's not surprising y'all tried it this tier.
Yeah, we definitely had a larger roster going into TOS, so we decided to make that early push.
I've always wanted to try day raiding, but I've always just been scared, because I wanted to try, like, I've wanted to do what you guys did, you know, just try it one day, not have to do it every single day for weeks, or, well, 2 weeks or so on end. You know, trying it one day wouldn't be a bad thing to do once in a while, just for the experience of it. But anyhow, we might as well just be jumping into the subject matter of tonight's show, which, of course, is all Fury related. And we can start with Fury at the start of the Legion expansion. So going into Emerald Nightmare, Fury was pretty underplayed in comparison to Arms, which at the time was probably one of the most popular specs at the time, especially for melee. So besides number tuning, what do you guys think attributed to Fury being considered underwhelming?
Well, you said Arms was the most popular. I think you confused popular with the most overpowered, but those two usually go hand in hand.
Yeah, usually.
Arms had a lot of things going for it in the beginning of the expansion that Fury didn't. Most importantly, the tuning. Also, their legendaries. And we talked about this earlier. Arms legendaries were ridiculously overpowered at the beginning of EN, and they didn't get tuned down until, partway through. So, and that's when you saw Arms warriors going from doing 10-20% more DPS than everybody else to dropping to middle, still high, but more mid-high on the meter.
No, they were still topping meters even with the legendary nerfs at that point. It just took the additional nerfs that came in after TOV and such. But that's another thing to talk about. But why was so few people playing Fury? I know it's number tuning is always something that, people want to play whatever does the most DPS. But was there any core issues with the spec itself? Was there anything wrong?
I don't think there were any core issues that weren't already present, that aren't still present. There still are some issues with Fury. The real thing is that the spec just didn't come into itself until you started getting geared up, until you started getting legendaries. Of course, legendaries were the big deciding factor at the beginning of the expansion when nobody had any. Now it's so easy to catch up that you can easily swap from one spec to the other. If you don't already have your legendaries, you can catch up on them really quickly and go ahead and do your business. Plus, they nerfed legendaries, so they're a much smaller game than they used to be. There have been some improvements to Fury's talent since, but I think there is a bit of a misconception that ARMS was way ahead of Fury, even in Emerald Nightmare. I think it was a lot easier for ARMS to be ahead, but if you go back and look at the logs, there are a good number of Fury ranks mixed in with the ARMS in the upper, top 10, top 20, top 50 of the Emerald Nightmare bosses.
Yeah, well, I think Fury's main issue in Emerald Nightmare was that it was competing with one of the perceived to be strongest single target classes in the game, and Emerald Nightmare had a lot of single target fights or fights without a lot of adds, a lot of passive cleave, which is what Fury really excels at. Another issue with Fury is that they didn't really have, well, they didn't have any tier bonuses. They had really low power level gear. They had access to pretty good legendaries, but they were nowhere near the level of ARMS legendaries like we were talking about earlier. So I think overall the strengths of Fury weren't really able to shine in the Emerald Nightmare, and so everyone just gravitated towards ARMS.
Well, I mean, even with the Execute Ring was probably I want to say 2 times as strong on ARMS than it was on Fury, even with them having the same proc rate, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
much stronger for ARMS, and that's just kind of by the design of Fury. Fury doesn't really have room for those extra GCDs. Funny enough, it was still one of the better legendaries for Fury in EN, even though it isn't now. And that's because we were all playing Massacre at the time. And, of course, it had a higher proc rate, but we were all playing Massacre at the time. So the ring had some synergy with Massacre that, unfortunately, it really doesn't anymore after its proc rate nerfs.
Mm-hmm. So, in EN, just going over just EN slowly, and maybe some of TOV. Obviously, we saw a lot of Fury play on Helya in TOV, but in EN, like Cap just said, most of the bosses were single target. There was a couple where it was multi-target, but even then, it could be argued that it was mostly single target. Il'gynoth, you had to be careful of how many slimes you were killing off at a time. Dragons, I guess, Fury could do quite well with Odin's Fury when all the little ads are spawning, and the shades as well. But besides that, there wasn't too many fights where it was more than one target up at a time, or even burst AoE situations, which I feel is a big reason as to why ARMS just kept on pushing further and further ahead over Fury, and you saw more players gravitating towards it, ignoring the number tuning, obviously.
Well, there's an interesting situation that comes up too if you're just looking at how many people or how many ranks there are for each spec. When you fail to take into account that whatever spec is whether perceived or actually higher at the time, more people are going to play it. And when more people play it, especially the top end people, it's harder for the other spec to actually get ranks. I believe Binkenstein wrote a post about it a while back, or maybe it was Magdalena, I don't remember, wrote a post about it and how when a whole bunch of people stop playing the underdog spec, it ends up looking a lot worse in comparison than it actually is. Even if it is below the top spec, it looks even further below because the only people left playing that spec are frankly, the people who aren't necessarily doing it as well. There's, half as many people doing it, so it's a lot harder to establish the kind of average that the top end spec has.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think it's important also to take into consideration how we're evaluating the spec's performance, because logs aren't necessarily the only metric that people evaluate specs in progression rating. So for ARMS, I know for several fights I was running defensive stance and was generally not introduced, not trying to,
Not performing as well as you
yeah.
should.
Well, basically, I mean, I don't know. The thing with Fury is that it didn't really have access to a lot of great defensives, and it didn't bring a lot of as much utility, I guess, than as ARMS did in Emerald Nightmare.
Well, yeah, that's one of the main issues too with Fury that at least in EN was a very transparent issue. It was everyone made a meme out of it was the extra damage taken, and then obviously you had the high health pool, but at the end of the day, many people were thinking that the high health pool really wasn't making up for the damage taken. Which I know, Archie, you did some math on it, and what did that turn out to be?
Well, the health increase mostly made up for the increased damage taken. At the time, it was 30 and 30. So you took 30% extra health or extra damage during Enrage, but you had 30% extra health. And that more or less made up for it in terms of taking damage. The hard part was when it came to healing up that damage. But most of the time in Mythic Raids, healing isn't that big of an issue. Usually, if you get healed up, you get overhealed. So you very rarely have to deal with taking damage just ticking you down constantly and never going back up to full. However, it did continually lead to this perception that, Fury just takes extra damage, therefore it sucks. And there were some situations in which trying to heal up all that damage, like Il'gynoth, where you're taking a consistent dot, would be detrimental.
And yeah,
And
and at the end of the
ultimately,
day,
I was gonna say they did change that later on though. We saw and they lowered that, so it's no longer 30 and 30.
at
It's
the end of the
30
day
and
too,
20 now.
though, it's only defensive. It's not really much of a defensive, to be honest, with the damage. So
Well, the defensive was Enraged Regeneration, which
yeah,
was nice because you could mitigate damage and then heal it back up. The problem with that is it required you to actually have a target. Something that Capcake was hitting on is that he was able to use defensive stance, and while it would lower his damage output a little bit, so it might make his logs look a little bit worse, when you're raiding progression, your focus is really just killing the boss more so than getting a good rank, whether personal or guild-wise, would mean that sitting in defensive stance for something like Il'gynoth, for example, when that dot's rolling, he might be doing a little bit less damage, but he's also taking a whole lot less damage, so that really helps his healers out.
I mean it's a 20% DR on a 10-second cooldown. It's a
Yeah,
very
20%
very strong
DR
nerf.
and only 10% damage nerf, which is a great trade if you're in a healing intensive fight like that was, especially when people are under healing it during progression.
Another fight too is Cenarius, where the Thorns damage was a massive issue, especially for burst classes like warriors with their battle cry.
I remember
Defense,
one-shotting
yeah.
myself multiple times.
Yeah, I mean it was pretty ridiculous trying to actually play that as a warrior.
Especially when the tree was brought in to Cenarius, and you just press Odin's Fury, or if you were playing arms, you would start cleaving, and it would just get really, really bad very quickly. But that's about it in the end, really. Like there wasn't too much of an issue with Fury, really. It was just outshined by arms, is what we can agree on.
Well, I managed to play Fury for the entirety of the expansion, for all of EN, all of TOV, and it didn't hold my guild back whatsoever. A lot of people have this problem when they're looking at, oh, I just want to play whatever's best, I need to compete. First off, you compete against your spec. You don't necessarily compete against your class. Now, sure, some people want to compete against their class, but very, very rarely, unless you're at the very tippity top of progression, do you have to worry about specifically your damage being the difference between a kill or a wipe. If you're wiping to bosses at 0.01% of their health left, there's almost always a bigger issue than, man, if I was just playing arms or if I was a fire mage playing frost. Usually it's more like, oh, if that person hadn't died or if I hadn't dropped this debuff in the middle of the raid and forced us all to move, that would have been a kill. So while there is often a difference between damage between two classes, people like to see a 5 or even a 10% deviation and blow it up in their minds to a 20, 30, 40, 50% deviation. Just, oh, arms, dumpsters, Fury. But like I said, I managed to play Fury for the entirety of EN with none of the DPS legendaries, and my guild still did quite well in the rankings, especially for a 9-hour guild.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like every single spec isn't, like the little differences between specs isn't going to maybe translate into a boss kill or a boss wipe. But I think the mindset that a lot of progression raiders have is trying to edge out every possible benefit that their class can give to the raid because it's incredibly competitive, right? I mean, I come from a hardcore rating perspective, so if you're not DPSing as much as you possibly can in every situation, then there's someone else who's going to outperform you, and there's a lot of pressure to basically do everything in your power to maximize your DPS, maximize your survivability, and just like perform as well as you can.
And then it just brings the whole mentality of that people like to copy what the top end people are doing, which is like the whole AP scenario again. Top end raiders weren't liking with the AP scenario, and then players weren't liking it because they thought they had to farm just as much as the top end raiders did. People look at Warcraft logs, they look only at the top rankings, and then they say, well, if they're using this for the top rankings, then it must be the best way, so I'm gonna do the same thing. And everyone just wants to do whatever the top end people are doing because they think it's best and they want to be best as well. That's just the mentality there is, and it's gonna stay like that for a while. And I believe there's many reasons as to why that they all just added up onto each other to create the beast that Fury became. But I think we just can start off with the buffs and one nerf that Fury got when we were going into Nighthold. So going into Nighthold, Dragon Roar, which was the default talent at the time, got nerfed from 20% increased damage to 16%. And in return, they buffed Frothing Berserker from 10% damage to 15, Reckless Abandon.
Which was, I do want to stop right there.
Yeah, go.
You're about to mention Reckless Abandon and Dragon Roar. Dragon Roar competed with Reckless Abandon. It didn't compete with Frothing. Frothing was separate. The funny thing was Reckless Abandon and Dragon Roar were already pretty similar talents. The fact is everybody was playing Dragon Roar, though. Nobody was playing Reckless Abandon. So they wanted to buff Reckless Abandon to make them a little more equal. And they did. They increased the duration of Battlecry by 2 seconds, but then nerfing Dragon Roar on top of it, that already made Reckless Abandon better than Dragon Roar. Nerfing Dragon Roar on top of it was just flat out overkill, and we've never taken the talent again. It was just kind of funny that they had the talents almost equal, bumped one just a bit above the other, and then dumpstered the original.
It just shows how little fine tweaking there has to be just for something to change that quickly.
Well, it shows how impactful a 4%. Well, actually, it was a pretty impactful nerf. If you look at 20% down to 16, seems they only removed it 4% off of it, but realistically, that's a 25% nerf. That's huge, or 20% nerf rather.
Yeah, and on top of that, we have the Battlecry damage talent, which is where when you use Dragon Roar, so it's an even bigger nerf during the Battlecry window.
Indeed.
Well, no, it wasn't a nerf. It was a buff because we got 2 seconds added onto the Battlecry window.
Well, when you used Dragon Roar, though, you used it with Battlecry, correct?
Yeah.
So it's a bigger nerf to Dragon Roar. Instead of just the 4%, you lose the extra Battlecry damage as well from the Dragon Roar buff.
Oh, well, sure. Yeah, I mean, you would only get 16% increased damage.
It's a compounded nerf. Yeah, it's a compounded nerf, which hampered Dragon Roar.
Yeah. And then, like I said, you had the Frothing Berserker buff, which buffed it from 10% increased damage to 15, and that was to compete with Massacre. And then, I'm just going to go over the buffs, and then we can talk about them in a bit. We had the War Machine buff as well, from 10-second duration to 15 seconds. Wrecking Ball got buffed from 200% extra damage on Whirlwind to 250%. And then Fury also just got a general 5% damage buff added on top of that. And that's about it, really. I believe Archie did say there was a execute damage buff.
Yeah, execute's damage got dramatically buffed. And that was really because execute wasn't performing during EN. In fact, even with Juggernaut, it was often better not to execute if you were in a situation where you're taking a talent like Carnage, or just anytime you weren't using Massacre. Frothing Berserker wasn't really talented at the time. And back then, because Massacre only worked sub 20%, if you had a fight with a lot of AoE, like a lot of dungeons, for example, you would just take Carnage and you'd never actually press execute because you had no hope of getting enraged. It was just damage that didn't get you anything, really. And you wouldn't stack up Juggernaut enough to actually do anything. So they dramatically buffed execute's damage, which is really the only reason why we started executing anything without, specking Massacre.
Indeed. And then Fury also, obviously with new raid tier, or the end of the raid tier at least, we have tier bonuses. And Fury's tier bonus is, for tier 19, is quite good. And it's a nice quality of life feature too. So the tier 19 bonus basically made it so your wet noodle ability, Furious Slash, actually almost guaranteed that your next Bloodthirst would be a critical strike, which would enrage you. So increase your overall enrage uptime by a bit and also helped out in execute phase. And then your 4-piece basically just increased enrage uptime, or increased your enrage buff up duration, my bad, by 1.5 seconds, which, so it goes from 4 seconds to 1.5, which was 5.5 seconds up, which was quite a nice quality of life feature. What'd you think?
Well, it was a very nice quality of life, and buffing, the 2-piece in particular, buffing Furious Slash was a really feel-good bonus. It actually didn't amount to that much DPS, but it felt really good. Funny enough, the 4-piece was a really, really mediocre tier bonus. It sounds like it should be really strong. Oh, you get that extra second and a half on Enrage. However, it really didn't do much. Because Enrage is so cyclic, especially with that 2-piece bonus, you would often refresh Enrage before it ever ran out anyways. The only reason it actually became a really good bonus is because of the trinket everybody knows we're going to talk about in a minute, Draw to Soul. Initially, Draw to Souls was off the global cooldown. So you could use your opening Rampage to enrage yourself, and at the same time use Draught, get that 3 seconds of damage, and then go right back to Raging Blow or Bloodthirst to re-enrage you. When they changed it, though, shortly into the beginning of Nighthold, it was put on the GCD, and that meant that after using your initial Rampage to enrage you, it would fall out of Enrage. So you really needed that 4-piece bonus to make sure all of Enrage covered Draught. And then suddenly the 4-piece for Fury went to being actually one of the worst tier bonuses across the board to being one of the best, just because of that trinket.
Now, speaking of the trinket, do we want to say that it was overpowered?
Absolutely.
It was like 100%.
There's no arguing that. It was, we told them from day one. We said Draught is just flat out too strong for a trinket. While there was a hefty opportunity cost, the opportunity cost wasn't enough to outweigh the massive amount of damage you got out of it. Now, it wasn't the 20% damage increase that people looked at their meter and saw. They saw Draw to Souls doing 15, 20, 30% of their damage. It wasn't actually that much because there was an opportunity cost, but it was still a good 8, 12, 10, 12% of most people's damage, which is a lot more than trinkets are typically billed as. Generally, trinkets are aimed to be about 5% DPS increases.
And I mean, people can talk about opportunity cost all they want, but at the end of the day, Fury did have the least opportunity cost on the trinket, considering we were using it, compared to other classes, such as Unholy Death Knights, which the trinket got absolutely slaughtered for them, due to the shadow damage and their mastery. And then other classes as well, I know Pharaoh Druids tried messing with it, but it just found they couldn't fit it in anywhere. It just fit perfectly in to Fury and even Arms. But then there was also another trinket that was also quite strong, and that's Convergence of Fates, which to this point we are still actually using. And if you put DOS and you put COF up against each other, does Draught really look as strong as it is in comparison to Convergence?
Well, Convergence is a really funny trinket. It ranges from absurdly powerful to actually really weak. There's an ups and downs side to that trinket. The upside is obviously that it lets you use Battlecry more often, and that is a huge DPS increase if you can actually use it a lot. The downside is it's dependent on 2 factors. One, the raid mechanics. If you're delaying Convergence of Fates, or sorry, if you're delaying Battlecry after your Convergence of Fates has brought it off cooldown, Convergence is losing a lot. If Battlecry isn't actually on cooldown, Convergence doesn't do anything, and therefore it's a wasted trinket. 2 is actually, I fucked that up. What I meant to say is 1 is encounter mechanics. If encounter mechanics force you to delay Convergence, then it's not doing anything. And two, if you are actually delaying Battlecry because you're not using it on cooldown, Convergence isn't doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it really powerful when you have AoE that comes up every 30 seconds instead of every 40 seconds. Or if there's AoE 1 minute into the fight and you want to use Battlecry twice before that comes up, it's really powerful. But if you have like a Gul'dan situation where in Phase 1 and Phase 2 of Mythic Gul'dan, you're already using Battlecry for eyes, which spawn every 45 seconds or so, you don't need Convergence for that. So it actually doesn't add anything because you're delaying Battlecry anyways. It really didn't start shining until the last phase.
Now, is the Trinket very strong? Because as warriors, we only have one built-in baseline CD, which is Battlecry. That's literally it. That's the only CD we have. It's just Battlecry. And Battlecry is already on a 1 minute cooldown for arms, and it's on a, is it 45 seconds for Fury?
50.
50,
but it's usually reduced to about 45.
Procs.
Yeah.
So, and then you have other classes, such as, I want to go back to Frosty K's. Their Convergence ended up lowering their Hungering Rune Weapon, which is a 3 minute cooldown. But in a 2 minute cooldown, my bad. And it didn't lower their Pillar of Frost cooldown, which is a 1 minute cooldown, which is sort of like Battlecry. So, could it be that just because we have only one cooldown ability baseline, because Avatar is not baseline, that COF sort of got out of control because they couldn't, because it's already such a short cooldown, right? Battlecry is only a 50-second cooldown. I never understood why the proc rate of COF for Fury was so high.
Well, it was higher for Fury than it was for Arms, because Arms was already getting a significantly reduced cooldown through anger management. That was really why it was, because if Arms had anger management, and then it also had Convergence at the same rate that Fury did, Arms would be getting like 15-second cooldowns on Battlecry. It would be absurd. You'd have 40-50% uptime on the buff. It would just the damage would be a huge runaway gun. The reason why Fury had a higher proc rate is just because of that. A lot of people don't realize exactly how much DPS Battlecry adds. It's a ridiculously powerful cooldown. I dare say it's the most powerful cooldown in the game outside of Fire Mage's Combustion, which is basically the same thing. It just also converts crit into mastery.
But my point is, why was... Because honestly, it felt at times, I'd pop my Battlecry, and then 10 or 15 seconds later, my Battlecry is already on a 10-second cooldown. That feels kind of too strong in terms of its proc.
Well, that's based on just like how the Trinket is coded, right? Like the proc rate is not like a set amount. I mean, it's RPPM, right? So it can have like slingshot effects where you get like a bunch of procs right in a row. It also has increased proc rate based on your haste, which turns out to be the stat that all Fury Warriors stacked in Nighthold. So you just have absurd amounts of haste on top of already a high base proc rate. It's just procking all the time and feels really good to use.
They could still nerf that, couldn't they, though? I mean, with Retribution Paladins, they completely gutted the Trinket for them with their wings.
Well, the problem is the multiplicative effect. So wings is really powerful, but you stack it on top of other buffs, and that's what made it too strong, and that's why they took it away for Ret Paladins. It is important to note that Convergence isn't only strong for Fury still. There's a lot of specs using it, including Unholy, which you brought up earlier. Unholy is still using Convergence to line up their, I forget the name of their buff is, Army of the Dead and Apocalypse, I think.
Well, I mean, I was even using COF on Sister's progression when I was playing Arms just for Ravager. It would come up for every Moon Talon.
I think it's fine if a Trinket is still really powerful, the next tier. I think it's bad if it's powerful without any kind of cost. Like, Draught of Souls remaining relevant would have been bad, because it would have encouraged you to continue farming a competitive eye-level Draught. With Convergence, however, you don't really need a high eye-level version of it, so you can get it from anywhere and it's still good. However, it can fail, which is a real difference between Draught. Draught, you just have to press it and it does its damage. With Convergence, if the encounter mechanics, and there are actually a few encounters, Kill Jaden is a good example of this, which necessitate delaying Battlecry because he does his long intermissions and you're not doing any damage. So in cases like that, Convergence really doesn't add much of anything. So that's the key. And like I said before, if you're just not using Battlecry perfectly on cooldown, the Trinket loses a lot of potential damage.
But it didn't lose.
So
that
I think
damage.
it's all right.
It didn't lose that damage though in Nighthold, because I mean, in almost every boss fight, you ended up using Battlecry on cooldown. A couple examples I can think of where you didn't were Gul'dan Phase 1, because the eyes lined up perfectly, where you couldn't actually use a Battlecry between them unless you really, really, really wanted to gamble it. But besides Gul'dan Phase 1, I mean, it was kind of useless in Gul'dan Phase 1, like I said, but in Gul'dan Phase 3 on Illidan, it was crazy good, especially with the parasites.
Yeah.
Well, Gul'dan, Croesus, occasionally you would want to delay it. Luriel you would delay sometimes for ads. There were a lot of situations. Trilliax you would delay just because you wanted to line up with Draught better when he wasn't annihilating. There were a lot of situations, and yes, the Trinket is powerful. Probably even a little too powerful, but it wasn't the sole thing making Fury better than Arms or just Fury the best spec of the time. So I don't really think it's fair to criticize this Trinket as being the worst thing ever because it's so powerful, it's making everything above it. With Fury, had a lot of factors, which you hinted at earlier, that really put it above Arms in Nighthold.
Yeah, I was just comparing Draught versus Convergence, and you know, everyone just seemed to think that Draw was the absolute best, and that was all that it was to Fury. But I mean, it was very strong. But Convergence was like right there on the back line supporting it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was something that Fury just had going for it. It had two very good trinkets that propped up its damage a lot in Nighthold. If you compare it to now, it's kind of different because we're still using the same trinket, which is still a powerful trinket, but you know, it's not like we've actually upgraded anything. And then the new trinket that we're using primarily in place of Draught, Umbral Moonglaves, it's powerful because it lines up well with Fury, and it's ridiculous on AoE, but in terms of single target, it's only about a 6% damage increase, which is really just barely above the target range for trinkets, which again I said was usually around 5%. So it's a far cry from Draught's, 8, 10, 12% increase.
And you did say you didn't mind going back and just grabbing an old COF, because like you said, eye level doesn't matter. It doesn't increase its proc chance or anything. It's just more strength, more main stat on it. But just recently on the Reddit AMA for the developers, the class developers, that they did on the WoW subreddit, they were talking about nerfing Convergence going into Argus. They don't seem to want to touch it in TOS currently. And what do you think is that?
I mean, I agree with that. Like I said earlier, I think it's all right to continue using Convergence because it's a trinket that can fail. It's not a permanent total damage increase. If either you're failing as a player by delaying your Battlecry too much, which sounds like a really simple thing, just press Battlecry, but I look at a lot of logs and I coach a lot of warriors, and that's one of the biggest issues people have is they have a roughly 35 second cooldown on Battlecry thanks to Convergence, but they're only using it every minute or even more sometimes. And two is because encounter mechanics will lower the effectiveness of that trinket. If you're doing something which necessitates delaying your cooldowns, whether it's Maiden's intermissions could possibly do it, or Kill Jaden's intermissions, you're not going to get as much out of that trinket as you would otherwise think based on things like simulations, which have a 100% uptime.
Right. But in general, though, I mean, all those things combined, tier 19 on top of DOS, on top of COF, on top of all the buffs that Fury got, among the talent setup that was made up, and also the boss timings in Nighthold, made Fury quite a monster, and probably top 1 or 2 spec. It was always between Fury and Frosty K's at the time, until Affliction Warlocks literally just came out of nowhere.
There were a few. Frostmage was exceedingly powerful on single target with the right legendaries, though it didn't really have much multi-target potential during Nighthold.
Yeah, I mean, as a raid
Warlocks
as a whole,
were still really powerful. One of the other things you kind of didn't mention, or rather got glossed over, was the ads in Nighthold were very impactful to making Fury better, but it was specifically the buff to War Machine. I feel like when Arms and Fury were initially tuned, and a lot of our initial projections for tuning had them pretty close, it wasn't until we realized exactly what kind of uptime we could get on War Machine in those encounters in Nighthold that we realized, wow, having, you know, double or triple uptime on Heroism, or Bloodlust, if you may, is pretty, it turns out that's pretty impactful. So the ability not only to deal a lot of AoE damage, which Arms could do too, you know, Arms used Ravager on Loriel and managed to do a lot of DPS with it, but it paled in comparison to dealing damage to those ads and then getting free Heroism on top of it.
I mean, it was even... You can go, Cap.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna add on to that, saying that a lot of fights in Nighthold, it felt like they were designed with Fury in mind. Like, if you take a look at just Gul'dan, for example, I feel like that's like the quintessential Fury fight, right? Like, you have burst AoE windows that come up every minute or so, which lines up with Odin's Fury and Battlecry and all that. And then you have like insane damage amplification buffs in phase 3, so you could stack all your DPS and draft all over them and like just destroy the boss. Like, I don't
I
know.
love drafting all over things.
Yeah, well, that's
I don't
really,
think they were
that's what you're
designed
doing.
with Fury in mind. I just think
Well,
it was a happy coincidence.
well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it felt like Fury was the spec that was intended to, you know, destroy these fights.
It's actually funny because I think Gul'dan, it reminds me a lot of Garrosh. And if you did Heroic at the time, Garrosh in Siege of Orgrimmar, it was really the same way. It had a lot of single target, but they were all punctuated by AoE phases about a minute apart, which enabled Fury again at the time, although Arms did fairly well during the latter parts of Siege, could blade storm all over them, and it lined up perfectly with Battlecry just to nuke those ads every minute or so, or every minute and a half.
Yeah, but while Fury was very strong, though, it still had an issue here or there. It was, I mean, at the end of the day, it was very minor in comparison to just how strong the spec was doing, but there were still issues, and one glaring issue was Juggernaut, which is a golden trait and feels very, very bad because it feels like it punishes you. It doesn't reward you for playing well. It doesn't feel like it doesn't reward you for playing well, and it just punishes you for either making a mistake or being forced to do what you have to do and dropping the buff itself. And outside of Star Augur and Croesus, and I want to say phase 2 Gul'dan, depending on how the storms are lining up, Juggernaut really didn't feel that strong.
It didn't live up to itself.
At
Yeah.
all.
But that's the problem with Juggernaut. I feel like it's a really cool talent that really doesn't work in WoW. If you had some kind of encounter which, like a challenge mode, basically, for raids, where the raid continually scaled to your eye level, Juggernaut would be amazing in those longer fights because they always stay long. The problem with Juggernaut is it feels really impactful on long fights, but fights rarely stay long for long. I'll give you an example. We just killed Mythic Sisters of the Moon, and I got up to 64 stacks of Juggernaut, which is insane. That's the highest I've had this entire expansion. But I know that's not going to stick around because every week we go back to Sisters, we're going to be a little bit stronger. We're going to execute the fight a little bit better. Less people are going to die. Our eye level is going up. So that fight is going to get continually shorter and shorter. And by the time we're on farm, I anticipate we're going to be killing that fight instead of the 8.5 minutes it took us the other day. It's going to be down to 5 minutes. And at that point, I go from potentially getting 2 minutes in execute to stack up Juggernaut to only getting a minute or maybe even less. We'll see how gear inflation plays out this tier. And that's the real problem with Juggernaut, is it ranges from being absurdly powerful on long fights to absolutely underwhelming or even potentially worthless on the shortest of fights. like Mythic plus Dungeons. Unless it's a high Tyrannical, you're really not even going to use Execute. You might use it twice before the boss dies, and in that case, it really didn't have time to do anything.
Yeah, when you look at the talent, or when you look at the trait Massacre, and you see like, oh wow, I can stack execute up to 99 times. This is crazy. But then like you read that it previously had a 6 second duration for the buff, which felt horrible to try and keep up, and now it's 8 seconds. But there was no realistic situation outside of like progression rating when you had 3 people alive to kill a boss that you were gonna get above 20 stacks. And it's just like there's no organic time in a raid environment where you're going to live out the fantasy of stacking Juggernaut stacks
And that
without,
assumes
yeah,
you're even the guy who's still alive. Let's not
exactly,
forget that
yeah,
on progression, the execute phase is usually the most dangerous part of a fight for people to survive. So
yeah,
if the Fury Warrior, who's also taking extra damage and doesn't have any immunities or particularly good defensives, just happens to get killed halfway into execute because he was one of the unlucky few to get chosen by a mechanic that one shots you, or a mechanic where you say, hey, we're just going to sacrifice these people, or you just die due to bad positioning or whatever. You don't get anything out of Juggernaut, so you have a gold that just literally didn't do anything for that fight. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be dying in a perfect world, but we all know that progression is rarely perfect.
yeah. Well, on top of that, like you don't even have to die, right? You just have to not press execute for 6 seconds, which in a lot of fights is really, really easy to do. So I mean,
Yep,
like if
Gul'dan.
you're, yeah, there's Gul'dan, like Star Augur. I mean, if you don't position perfectly when dodging the I beam and then charge in immediately, like you're gonna there goes your Juggernaut stacks and like
Hmm.
have fun.
Yeah,
Enjoy being a Fury Warrior, like
the part that got me on Augur was the ad. What I didn't like about Juggernaut is it actually punished you in two ways. If you drop Juggernaut, obviously you lose all that potential damage. Ramping back up to the 20 stacks or whatever you're at instead of going up to 40 stacks is just flat out worse because, it's a stacking effect. On top of that, though, even if you don't drop Juggernaut, but you're just not using execute, like say there's another ad up and you're hitting that ad, but somehow you're still managing, like the thing that should not be on Augur, but somehow you're managing to keep up Juggernaut because you're turning and executing it once every 6 seconds, you're still getting a lot less stacks than you should be getting because you're not using execute as much. So if you are actually following fight mechanics and killing the thing that should not be instead of just tunneling Augur, not only are you punished by potential damage you would have done from using execute, but also if your stacks drop from losing the potential damage of stacking it up higher. So it really does damn you in two ways instead of just one.
yeah,
Like I said, it's a cool ability, and it really does feel pretty awesome when you get it to 50, 60, or whatever stacks, if you can. But those times are so seldom. You rarely get over 20 or 30 stacks that it just doesn't work out. And when you factor in gear inflation and everything else, where the fights continually get shorter, you very rarely stay at that position unless challenge mode raids suddenly become a thing, or we just make raid encounters really long at all times, which will never happen because gear inflation will end up knocking them down. It doesn't work as well as the idea of it seems to.
So
Compare it to
just
something like ARMS, and I know you've had a lot of experience with this tier, Capcake.
mhm,
Executioner's Precision is basically just a better version of Juggernaut. It's a Juggernaut that doesn't
yeah.
require ramping.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are a lot of things that are going for arms execute, which we don't have to talk about right now, but it just, you're not as committed to keeping up a really annoying buff in a fight, and you're not encouraged to play suboptimally or greedy in order to maximize your class's toolkit, which I think is just the biggest drawback to Juggernaut.
Well, it's also a 30-second debuff instead of an 8-second buff.
Yeah, exactly.
It can cleave. I mean, it does have a lot of things going for it, but even
Yeah.
ignoring the numbers tuning, it just feels a lot easier to use because it's a 4 GCD ramp instead of an endless or 99 stacking, which is, might as well be endless.
And it doesn't feel like you're screwing
Ramp
your
over
raid
time.
over either.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I mean, you can still abuse Executioner's Precision as arms and purposely, go execute something to try to build it up when you should be doing something else. There's always going to be room in this game for that kind of scumbaggery, just for lack of a better word. And you can even argue that it's a tactic. Like, maybe we shouldn't have our Fury Warrior change the ads so that they can stack up Juggernaut all the time. I agree with that logic, if only more raid leaders would recognize it. Luckily, I have a raid leader who's smart like that, but I have a lot of people say, oh, well, my raid leader said I have to turn to the ad. I was like, well, your raid leader's just screwing you. I don't know what to tell you. Unless the ad is keeping you from winning the fight, it's just hurting your DPS.
Yeah,
Arms doesn't really face those issues as much.
Yeah, definitely. Like for my raid, warriors always get like execute priority. If there's like a boss or something or a target that is going to be an execute for a while, then they're just going to let the warriors stick on that because they know that that's what the spec excels at, and they're going to have other people who can like target switch easily or like burst another target down really quickly. Like they're going to have those classes do that.
I mean, it should be that way anyways, especially when our ability is literally called Execute.
Yeah.
So anyhow, going back to the Reddit AMA that the class devs did, they actually answered a question regarding Juggernaut. And basically they said that Juggernaut was meant to be this crazy ramp-up style at the end of a fight, but it sort of ended up overwhelming the entirety of the Execute phase. And also the whole 99 stack thing was too far-fetched of a dream, so it ended up leading to some disappointment. But they're very reluctant on increasing the duration of Juggernaut even more due to, and this is what I find absurd, due to the Execute ring, which I don't believe it procs anywhere near enough to outside of Execute or even in Execute to be an issue of Juggernaut, to where you can go into Execute with a bunch of Juggernaut stacks built up. And they also said that they were also looking at the strengths of Frothing Berserker relative to Massacre, which, I mean, Massacre does help you build up Juggernaut stacks very fast, as Archie, you were doing some testing on the PTR for 725 with the Soul of the Battle Lord ring, and you were building up Juggernaut stacks almost 2 times as fast as you were if you're using Frothing Berserker, correct?
Well, not quite that fast, but yeah, you will build them up a lot faster because you're really only using Execute and Massacre rather than using Execute continually having to use Bloodthirst and Raging Blow or Bloodthirst and Furious Slash to get yourself enough rage back to keep using Execute. Arms doesn't really have that problem, of course, because it has a rage refund on Execute now, which really helped them because that was the real limiting factor during Execute, was they'd run out of rage. Now they don't have that, so they can kind of just spam it endlessly.
Indeed. But how do you feel about what they answered regarding Juggernaut and the whole, its interaction with the Execute ring?
Well, to be fair, I feel like it was a really poorly crafted question, and that's why we got what I consider kind of a poor answer. I'm really glad that they're finally looking at this, but we've been saying this is a problem since Alpha. I mean, it really didn't take a year to figure this out. The problem isn't Frothing versus Massacre. Making Massacre better or making Frothing worse doesn't really address the problem. That's addressing the result of the problem. And the problem is that Juggernaut just doesn't work in this style of game. Outside of the longest of encounters, like we talked about earlier. Sure, you could nerf Frothing, and in fact, that's what happened. Massacre was the talent to go with in EN and TOV, and then they buffed Frothing, and then we started using Frothing. I mean, it's not rocket surgery here. Like, nerfing Frothing again will just make us use Massacre, but that doesn't address the problem with Juggernaut. The problem with Juggernaut is just, one, some raid mechanics means it flat out won't work, like Storm of the Destroyer on Gul'dan. On Mythic, you're flat out not going to stand in Storm of the Destroyer. It will kill you, unless you have a prop paladin that really loves you and wants to waste his cooldown on you, and that'll only save you for one of them. The other problem is it just doesn't have enough time to ramp. If they want to fix Juggernaut, I mean, there's a variety of things that could be done to it. You could make it a debuff that never falls off. My personal suggestion would be make it a debuff that never falls off unless you execute another target. Kind of like the auto attack trinket from Archimond in HFC for Fury. So you'd ramp up this buff, and then if you auto attack something else, it would reset the buff. Kind of like that, but with execute. You could make the stack limit a lot lower and cap it a lot lower. That way, if it did fall off, you could just ramp it right back up to where it was really quickly, and that wouldn't be bad. That'd be akin to, Frenzy has 3 stacks. If you drop Frenzy, it's not a big deal because you only spend 3 GCDs getting it back up. If Juggernaut were 10 stacks or something, it really wouldn't be hard to stack it back up again, and it would make it a lot better for Mythic Plus and other short duration encounters. But just looking at frothing versus Massacre isn't the solution. And personally, I think Massacre is, while it's a really fun talent and while it really helps the execute phase, I think it's a really poor talent because I don't like choosing, do you want to be good sub 20% or do you want to be good above 20%? I think they could merge Carnage and Massacre to make one fully functioning talent, and that might actually be something that would compete well with frothing.
And then they would have to add a new talent in that row.
Yeah. If Massacre were that impactful, the Legendary Ring would be a lot stronger for Fury than it is. Because the Legendary Ring gives us Massacre. It's obviously not the lack of Massacre that's holding Juggernaut back. It just makes it feel better because it means that Mastery isn't a wasted stat outside of Battlecry during Execute.
Well, I mean, while we're on the topic of legendaries, we did get 2 new legendaries in 7.2.5 with the release of TOS, which was the Battlelord Ring, which is class-wide, it's not just spec-specific, but Fury did get the Valhar Berserkers, which you gave it quite an interesting name. What was it again?
It's the Reckless Rampage Rompers.
Yeah, the Reckless Rampage Rompers, which were pretty insane on the PTR due to its cleaving potential, and that got nerfed pretty quickly.
Disappointingly, I might add.
I did believe though that wasn't there talk of nerfing how much rage was refunded or generated?
At the beginning, I thought that they were going to drop it from like 6 to 3 or 2 or something.
Yeah,
I thought that was an absurd value.
Yeah, there was talk about that, and that probably would have mitigated the whole rage generation off of AoE. I don't know. I think that it would have been a much better legendary if it still generated rage from cleaving. I think as is now, with it only working on the primary target, it's basically just a duplicate of the helm. It's a slightly different version, but the same overall effect as the legendary helm, the CNR charger. So I don't know. I think the Valhar Berserkers working on AoE made it a lot more interesting of a choice. Maybe it could have had its rage nerfed, maybe only for AoE. It would generate half as much rage for AoE, or more. Maybe it would only generate rage up to 3 targets. Or maybe it could only generate rage up to 10 times per rampage or something. I don't know. You could find a whole bunch of different ways to change it up. But I feel like now, with it being a pure single target legendary, it's just basically the same thing as the hat, and that just makes it boring. Still very powerful, but boring.
The reason why I like the legs is that it's like just a quality of life buff again. I mean, rage generation legendaries always feel really good to me. Like before, when I was playing Fury without the hat, I don't know. It was just like a really big difference between having the hat and not having the hat. Having that extra rage generation because it gives you more in rage uptime. You get more rampages and stuff, and yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's a bad legendary. I'd happily use them.
No, it's a great legendary. I think it was better on AoE because it filled a niche that Fury didn't really value. So Arms is of course really strong at 2 to 4 target cleave because of sweeping strikes. Arms doesn't really lose anything when it starts cleaving. If you're spamming if you're spamming Whirlwind, obviously you'll start running out of rage, but just cleaving Mortal Strike and Executes, Arms don't really lose anything. For Fury to start whirlwinding and trying to cleave Rampage and Bloodthirst, you do actually lose something on that 2 to 4 target cleave because you're using Whirlwind, and even though it's free, it takes the place of Furious Slash, which means you're not getting that Taste for Blood buff. which means your Bloodthirst is not critting as often, which means you're not getting rage, you're not getting rage generation, and you're not using rampage as much, which again means less in rage. The legs fixed that because they increased rage generation on AoE and would help you at least maintain enrage during AoE. So that's why I think it was really important that they'd stay a kind of a cross between a single target and a multi-target legendary, and they would pair very well with the AoE, the Whirlwind belt. But
Right.
unfortunately, it was nerfed, so I don't want to harp on that all day because it'll just make me sad.
So, have you guys been using either of the legendaries?
Oh yeah, Fury. I mean, it's still one of the best legendary for Fury. And that's mostly due to the loss of tier 19 reducing and rage uptime. Having the legs and having the helmet really bump it back up. So it puts you back onto tier 19 levels of enrage uptime. Actually higher if you don't count the execute phase. The unfortunate part of the legs is unless you're using Massacre, they really don't do anything during execute because you're never using Rampage.
Right. But let's say we go back, and because there was talk when the Battlelord ring was first released, because it was Carnage before, but then it got changed into Massacre. With Massacre, with the ring providing Massacre, there was talk before we actually got into TOS itself that it could be powerful on extended execute phases such as Star Augur. But from our experience so far, does it really seem like there's any scenario where you would equip that ring? Maybe
Oh, yeah.
call an avatar?
No, it's still really powerful. I don't actually have it on live, although I did extensive testing with it on the PTR. I've just been unlucky so far. If I was using that ring on Mistress, for example, where I got 64 stacks of Juggernaut, it would have been an insane power increase, because if you go through and look at my log, my enrage uptime during the execute phase of that Sister's kill was like 20%. It was abysmal because I don't have tier 19 to prop up Bloodthirst crit anymore. I'm not using Rampage. The only time I'm actually getting enrage, unless I'm just really lucky and Bloodthirst managed to crit on its own, was during Battlecry. So having the ring there would have been an amazing power boost, and it synergizes very well with the high stacks on Juggernaut.
But the ring
So it's definitely
synergizes.
usable.
The ring synergizes better with the pants though than it does with the helm, right?
It's actually about equal. It does work a little bit better with the pants, but the helm is better itemized, and it takes up a worse tier slot. So they're fairly interchangeable at that point, the legs and the helmet. The helm gives 8 rage whenever you enrage, which you'll enrage by using the Massacre proc. The legs give anywhere from 0 to, 5 times 6, 30 rage. So 0 to 30 rage. Either way, if you're using Massacre, you're not going to rage starve, so it doesn't really matter. They both are impactful.
And it's the nice thing about Fury too. All the legendaries are pretty all close to each other, and it's kind of nice because it sort of feels like how the legendary system should have been from the start. Instead of always having to just equip whatever's best, you can sort of mismatch depending on the scenario and depending on your progression. I know plenty of people are running Pridas on Sisters due to just how much healing there is if your raid team is going full monkey and just dancing across the border of the Astral Purse line. So,
we'd actually talked about that in my raid before we killed it, as well as having people swap to Pirate Ez just to help the healing.
And I mean, that was something that
and
Big
help
Dumb
getting
Guild,
hit by runaway glaives.
that was something that Big Dumb Guild, everyone was looking at their stream, and I believe it was your raid leader or your GM that said that to upgrade your Pridos.
Well, yeah, like one of the legendaries that people should be looking to upgrade early on is Pride As, simply because it had such a massive survivability increase. And on a fight like Sisters, where most of the progression is learning to dodge glaives, I mean, it's really as simple as that. Aside from like timing the groups to change sides and stuff, that's where most of the damage that people are taking is coming from, and it just lowers the learning curve a little bit. Like it lets you get away with getting hit by like maybe one glaive or something. Things like that like actually make a big difference in progression rating. And on the topic of the Battlelord ring, having Massacre in progression is a huge boon, because you are getting those extended execute phases where like half of your raid is dead and you're able to get those Juggernaut stacks. So I think that
Yeah,
like the Battle Lore ring is in a really good spot right now, even if it's
but it
not
won't
like
stay
the.
there.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
even if it's not
that goes
close to
back to
the
the problem with Juggernaut,
Varsity
like we
ring.
talked about.
Yeah.
If the Battlelord ring, if I had it, it would be amazing to use on that sister's kill. It would have been amazing to use even on my initial Kill Jaden heroic kill, where I got 54ish stacks of Juggernaut. The problem is those don't last. If you look at my Kill Jaden kill now on heroic, even only a week's time, we're a lot better at the fight. We know what's going on now. Half the raid team isn't dying. We have more gear and more DPS because we got tier bonuses. Now I get like 35 stacks of Juggernaut. Next week it's going to be like 30, and so on
Yeah, it
and
just
so
starts
forth.
diminishing down.
Exactly, and when that happens, Battle Lord will go from being this really powerful ring because you have an absurdly long execute phase to being a really mediocre ring. If you're only getting 20 stacks of Juggernaut, or if you go back to Nighthold and you kill in Trilliax, we'll say in 2 minutes, or maybe normal Goroth is a better example, you kill him in 2 minutes, the Battle Lord ring is a wasted legendary. You just never really get to take advantage of it.
So should we be happy that our legendaries really don't matter too much to the fact that where we can equip utility ones if we need to, unlike other classes such as arms, or I mean even specs such as arms, where they're kind of just forced into using the execute ring and the helm, and anything outside of that is it's a big DPS loss. While in Fury, your legendaries really don't matter too much. Obviously, the DPS ones are gonna do you very well, but equipping the legs or equipping Prida is not going to be too much of a difference. Should we be happy
Yeah.
about that, or should we be concerned that our legendaries aren't providing us as much of a boost as it is for other classes, or is that an issue with the other specs?
I definitely think we should be happy that our legendaries are a little more flexible than other classes. I know Rogue and actually all the Rogue specs in general, like if you don't have the shoulders, then you're just not going to do damage, Like it's that kind of legendary design is really toxic for the game in my opinion. Like I think going into Legion, every single legendary should have had like a utility effect or something and not impact the DPS. So I'm more than happy to have a spec that's not incredibly reliant or like, dependent on DPS legendaries to actually play the game. I know before and after having execute ring for arms, like the spec feels completely different and it's not fun for players who don't have it and feel like they can't play the game if they don't get lucky.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think it's a lot better if your legendaries are all more or less the same. To use some numbers, most legendaries for Fury are about 3 to 4% gains, whereas the DPS legendaries are more like 6% gains. The DPS legendaries being the ring, the pants, and the helmet, and the cloak. Um, that said, I think it's a tuning issue when Arms and Fury, let's just say they're equal, but Arms gets 15% out of its helmet and 15% out of its ring. It either that pushes it well above being equal when Fury only gets like 6% out of its legendaries, or if they're only equal when Arms has its two top performing legendaries, but Fury can be equal with any of them, that creates a balance issue. And like Capcake said, it's an issue of have and have nots, and that doesn't feel good if you're one of the have nots.
Indeed.
So I think Fury is in a really good place legendary design wise, and I think that legendaries are meant to be around like 3 to 5% DPS gains. But I think and maybe Furies has a few that are overperforming, but then you look at classes or specs like Arms, Havoc Demon Hunters, all the rogue specs, mages, where they're getting 10-15% out of their legendaries, and that's just bad. And that's not balance. Balance is when things are relatively equal and you actually have some choice. When you're forced into situations like that, or you have the perception of feeling forced into situations like that, it's not good for the game because invariably somebody slips through those cracks.
Right. I have to agree too. I mean, it's healthy for the game. I feel like this is what the legendary system should have been from the start. And maybe not even having any DPS ones, just having legendaries such as Prida, Sefu's, and those other ones. So I feel it's really nice for Fury where you can actually change your legendaries unlike other specs. And really at the end of the day, I feel like I said, it's the way legendary should have been from the start. It feels bad not having the legendary that it feels like you need to have to be able to compete or to be able to do what someone else is doing. And
Yeah.
that feels horrible because you have no control over it either. It's not like you can target it because you can't.
The real
Besides nether
problem though
shards.
is the real problem though is it isn't always the legendary. Like we talked about the execute ring for ALs for arms. It's not actually that the execute ring is so strong. It's that executioner's precision is so strong. And because executioner's precision is so strong, using the ring is strong. So just nerfing the ring isn't really the right answer. And that becomes another balance problem because it'd be really easy to say, oh, they just need to nerf executioner's precision, and then the ring is balanced again. But then would the class be unbalanced if they weren't using the ring for executioner precision, you know?
Right.
It becomes
Yeah.
a very difficult math problem at that point. And I think it's better that the classes be balanced, even if they're balanced with the expectation of having legendary, than they be imbalanced regardless of what legendaries they have. So it's easy to say, well, they should just be better at balancing legendaries than it is actually to do sometimes. Balance is not as easy as a lot of people think it is.
Well, I mean, everybody thinks they can balance. They can, be the heads over at Blizzard and balance everything from their couch. When in reality, there's quite a lot of it. There's quite a lot of variables that are always changing that go into it, and one thing affects another. But
Yeah.
to wrap up the whole legendary discussion, going into the next expansion, if they were to bring in legendaries again, would you guys be fine with them having DPS legendaries and having it sort of where like Fury is right now, or would you just prefer that they're all utility?
I mean,
Capcake, you go ahead.
yeah, I kind of said this earlier. Just I think it's really bad design when a spec is not as fun without a legendary than as fun when it is when you have that legendary. Like, I mean, most people in the game aren't going to have these legendaries. They're going to be like, casual players who do a couple dungeons here and there and like do their world quests and like maybe have like 3 or 4 legendaries, right? And like they're just missing out on this entirely different spec, entirely different playing experience because they don't have these legendaries. And like, why? What is the point exactly of playing a game if not to have fun, you know? I mean, that's what it is at the end of the day. And the legendary system that we have right now is just introducing so many more feel bad moments than feel good moments. Like, I can't tell you how many times people have just been so upset that they get a utility legendary or not their best in slot legendary. Um, and I mean, like, what's the point of that? Like, why would you make the game like that? You know, it's just bad design.
And this goes back to the other point I want to bring up, which is, do you feel that at the end of the day, that the classes sort of feel like they're maybe not balanced, but I want to say designed around the legendary? Because Unholy, for example, or even Arms and EN, it felt like you needed the ring or the
Yeah,
gloves. Do you feel
certainly.
like maybe it sort of feels like the spec is, it's designed to be played with that legendary? Because Unholy is literally unplayable without the bracers. People cannot play the spec without the bracers. It doesn't feel right. The spec feels completely wrong, and that just feels horrible. Archie.
Well, I want to address that, but I really want to go back to your original question because I think that
Yeah.
was a really good question. And just to refresh, it was if legendaries were taken forward into a new expansion, should there be DPS legendaries? Should there be just utility legendaries or some combination of thereof? I think it's a really interesting question, and Capcake kind of hit on it, talking about fun. It's not fun to get a utility legendary, which you have no intention of using when you want a DPS legendary. And I get that. But at the same time, I think it's a really hard metric to pin down because it's always changing. What do you define as fun? You know,
Yeah.
if there are DPS legendaries in the game and you only want to use your DPS legendaries, yeah, it's not fun to get the run speed boots because you don't have any intention of using them. If those DPS legendaries didn't exist, though, would player perception shift. Like, let's just imagine there were no DPS legendaries, and you had Manaroth's healing bracers, and you had Agrimar's run speed boots. I can find a use for both of those. I love the run speed boots when I'm doing open world questing, because I can just zip from mob to mob, especially with War Machine Talented. However, if I were to look at a raid, I don't really need to run that often. So would I, as a player, end up with the perception that I have to have Manaroth's bracers to be a progression raider? Otherwise, my healing just isn't as much as the next Fury Warriors, so I have a disadvantage. Now, this is a hypothetical exercise, but I think that could very, very realistically happen. And that's the problem with legendaries as a whole. It isn't necessarily that one is imbalanced. Even if all legendaries were balanced to be the exact same amount of DPS, somebody would find a new metric to define them by. Like, tier 19 is exactly the same as much power as tier 20. It's not, but we're just saying it is hypothetically. But tier 19 feels so much better because it has, a quality of life increase that tier 20 doesn't have. I can see people making that argument. So I like the legendary system. I don't like the way they're awarded. I don't like the way all of them are balanced, but as we talked, that's a really hard thing to pin down in a game with so many variables. However, I do like the idea that they've added to the game with legendaries. I like the idea of being able to kind of pick and choose your bonuses on a case-by-case basis. I like the idea of kind of filling in gaps with your gear by, I have really bad bracers. Maybe I should use the bracers instead of Paradise or, whatever.
And you bring up a very good point, which is the whole player mentality and how it more than likely will shift, and there will be a new metric to figure out which legendary is ideal.
There's a saying I'm gonna repeat here. I'm not gonna say who this came from, but it's the perception of balance is often better than actual balance. And it sounds bad, like, well, how can that be true? It sounds bad. Like, things should be absolutely balanced and everything would be perfect. But if people don't perceive them as balanced, it really doesn't matter what the numbers are. And as an extension of that, talking about numbers and DPS and stuff like that, if people aren't playing right in the first place, it really doesn't matter what your balance is. If the balance is that Juggernaut at 50 stacks is balanced, but nobody's ever actually getting there, then it doesn't matter what the balance is, because if you never have 50 stacks, you're imbalanced. So right. How people perceive balance is a very powerful. It makes a big difference on how the game is perceived. For example, Arms and Fury. Right now, they're actually very close. Arms is maybe 5% ahead, maybe 10% ahead in the high outliers, but people are going to see that and perceive it as Arms is 20% ahead of Fury. So bumping up Fury 10% may not be the best idea. If they bumped up Fury 10% to make them equal, people may still see them as unequal.
Right, and that's just player mentality, because, you do talk about, like, right now in TOS, you talk about warriors, and it's arms, and it's everyone's like, oh, arms warriors, arms warriors, but Fury's right there. Fury's right there, right behind arms.
Yeah. You and I on Sisters, we had very comparable parses between our two kills with almost the exact same kill time.
It's just things like that. So I guess that's a good way to wrap up that discussion of the legendaries. And now we're going to go ahead and just transition into the questions that the Skyhold Discord themselves sent in. And the first question is actually very interesting, and I think you'll get a laugh out of this one. And someone asked, and I'm not making this up, someone asked, if Tier 21 was to revolve around Heroic Throw, what interesting mechanics or changes would you come up with to make it work? And I want to start with Cap. I'm gonna put you on the spot and see what you could come up with to make Heroic Throw work as a tier bonus.
Okay. So this is obviously in the context of Fury, right?
Yes.
I do Arms too if you want. I'm interested in this.
Yeah. I saw this like in the show notes, and I was just thinking like, Man, what would it really have to be? I mean, you could obviously do something easy like heroic throw applies, Colossus Smash, or like reduces the duration or the cooldown of your battle cry by like 10 seconds or something. Like, okay, it's a great tier bonus, but um I don't know. I mean, like, in order to use heroic throw, you have to go out of melee range, right? So you're already kind of doing that in arms to get charge rage generation. But for Fury, it's an entirely different, situation. I mean, I really don't know. I feel like that's heroic throw is just like a really filler ability when you're not in range and doesn't really do anything, like it doesn't do any damage. So, and it's like a 6 second cooldown too, so like you can't just spam it either. So, I don't know. Do you have
Say,
any ideas, Archie?
I do actually. I've actually talked about this before, so I'm interested where this question came from. I wonder if it came from one of my talks before, because I've talked before about making heroic throw useful. I've long been derisive of this ability because all it really does is act as a pull. It does such pathetic damage. It's not even a source of damage. It's like heroic leaping for damage, which we haven't done since Miss Pandaria. It's such insignificant damage it shouldn't even count it. It's like hamstring dealing damage. Like, what's even the point? I think, and not necessarily for a tier bonus, I'll get that in a minute, but I think heroic throw should be changed to a ranged execute. I think heroic throw, I'm not talking about a tier bonus, mind you, like this isn't necessarily a tier bonus, but I think heroic throw should be a ranged execute. I think heroic throw should be that ability when you're fighting a target, let's say PvP as a good example, because PvE mobs you don't usually run from you unless you're level 20. When you're fighting someone and you get them below 20% and they try to run away, you should, bam, whip out that axe, hits them, does execute level damage. It'll probably need to have the same rage cost as execute to keep it from being, ridiculously imbalanced, but it should function as a ranged execute with a cooldown, just to get those running away targets. It would also help maintain your Juggernaut stacks. If I had to leap out of range because Fallen Avatar is doing his big Shatter the Earth ability, I can whip my axe out at him and, refresh my stacks of Juggernaut. To talk about a tier bonus, though, that's an interesting idea, making it a tier bonus. I think first and foremost, the two-piece would remove the cooldown or change the cooldown of heroic throw. Not necessarily remove it. It depends on how strong you make the ability, but I think the 4-piece should make heroic throw into Siege era Stormbolt. If you remember in Siege, Stormbolt was that ludicrously powerful ability. You use it during Colossus Smash and it hits for, 1,000,000 damage, and back then that was a lot of damage. It was the most powerful attack in your arsenal, and for single target. So I think that if you were to make a tier bonus revolving around heroic throw, the 2-piece shouldn't remove the cooldown, it should remove the range requirement. That's what I was meant to say. It should remove the range requirement of heroic throw. That way you can use it from melee, and then the 4-piece makes it an actual powerful ability, either a buff of some sort or just direct damage. It'd be a pretty basic tier bonus. It wouldn't exactly be like, the most involved tier bonus ever, but it would, bring back Stormbolt essentially.
Well, I feel like removing the range requirement kind of takes the wind out of this whole thought experiment, right? Because like that's like a really limiting factor to heroic throw.
Well,
right?
see, but I think it's necessary because I think that even if it was a tier bonus revolving around, even if it did incredible damage or gave you an incredible buff, I think telling warriors who are supposed to be melee fighters up in the target's face or ass, as the case may be, at all times, telling them to run out of range and do something, whether it's to charge back in for rage or use heroic throw for some kind of damage or buff, I think it's bad design. I don't think you should do that. I think heroic charge is bad design. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want charge neutered the way it was in Warlords, but I don't think arms should be purposely running out of range to charge back in because it's a DPS increase, because it's a rage generation increase. I don't think that should happen.
So what if heroic throw was off the GCD, and instead of throw being the second letter, it was strike?
Well, then the ability, then the class is saved.
Yeah.
Heroic throw becomes heroic strike.
Yeah, that's the tier bonus right there. Tier 21. Set it right here.
Honestly,
No, I mean, it would be a really basic bonus, but I think just the two-piece removing the range requirement and maybe doing something else. Maybe it removes a range requirement and does something else minor. And then the 4-piece turning it into essentially Stormbolt would make it a bland bonus. Granted, it wouldn't be as interesting as increasing rage and rage up time or anything like that, but it would be a useful one.
I really like your idea of it being a ranged execute. That you could use it on Star Augur, you jump out, you throw it, and you keep up your Juggernaut.
I don't think that should be a tier bonus, mind you. I think that's
baseline.
Yeah, but that would be a great baseline change because heroic throw as it currently exists doesn't freaking do anything.
Yeah,
you use it as a ranged pull occasionally, but you never really want to pull from range as a warrior who's not a tank. You want to charge or occasionally leap. If the target's out of your range, heroic throw does pathetic damage, so there's no real reason to use it.
I think that'd be something. I think having it be ranged execute would be something more of concerns for the PvP people. Considering that'd be
probably
pretty funny.
It would still need to be balanced. It couldn't be free, because then you would just leap out of range, get a double execute by, throwing your axe and then charge back in. You just do that every 6 seconds. That'd be dumb. But if it had the same rage cost as a regular execute, it would at least allow you to do something if you get stuck out at range before you can get back into the boss. And I think it would help situations like Fallen Avatar, where even at 8 seconds, Juggernaut is extremely hard to keep up during his second phase, his ground phase. When he smashes the ground, you have to run out of range so he doesn't drop you in the lava and doesn't hit you with his ability, and then he walks back over. That whole sequence takes about 7 seconds. It's incredibly hard to keep up Juggernaut even at 8 seconds, which is again kind of the problem with Juggernaut isn't the duration, it's just that encounter mechanics don't work well with it. But having that ability to whip out your axe, sure, you'd spend rage on it, but whip out your axe, heroic throw it, refresh Juggernaut would fix a lot of the problems that Juggernaut has. I mean, hell, even if you were on like Augur and you were hitting another target, you could just spin around and whip your axe at Augur just to maintain Juggernaut on him and then go back to hitting the other ad.
That's great. I could
because it would have because it would have, I'm assuming it would have like a 6-second cooldown, not like, a 30-second.
I can see scenarios where I can see hilarious scenarios where you're doing a Arathi Basin, you're up at the lumber mill, someone jumps off and tries to glider away, or they try to float away, and you just come up behind them, throw an axe, and they just fall plummeting down to the ground.
Sure, but how is that any different from using the charge talent in PvP where you can charge them when you execute, I mean, that exists too. It'd be essentially the same thing.
A hilarious scenario to look at from an outsider's point of view. You just see a warrior throw this axe and this person just falls from the sky.
PvP is always a weird beast, and it usually has to be balanced separately. And I'm immensely happy that they're actually balancing PvP separate from PvE now, because that was long something that Blizzard said they didn't want to do, and it's been an oft request. Yeah. I mean, even back in BC and Wrath, we were saying, why aren't these separate? Because PvE just PvE stuff doesn't translate into PvP very well, and I'm very glad they've done that now.
Some things, there was the issue with the whole hamstring at the start of the expansion, with arms, where PvE did end up costing PvP, hamstring being put on the GCD.
Yeah.
But besides that, I think it's quite well. So we do have another question, and this one's basically more of a feely question and how you feel about the spec. So it's everyone's own opinion. But how does this iteration of Fury, this Legion one, compare to past iterations? Is it one of the better ones or one of the worst ones? And I think most people like to compare to the Mop Fury, which I believe was 5.4, which is where everyone thinks it was the glory days. So how do you... I don't know if you want to take this one first, Archie, and then Cap, you want to go after. How do you think it compares?
I think this is one of the better iterations of Fury. Despite some of the issues that Fury has in Legion, and I'm talking Legion as a whole, not any particular patch, I think design-wise, it's one of the best ones I've had. And I've not made it a secret that I actually like artifacts. I don't really like AP, but I like artifacts. I like the artifact traits and everything. I like how that all plays together. I like Fury being haste-driven. I like Odin's Fury. I actually like that Fury doesn't use Bladestorm the way Arms does, even though I know everybody loves Bladestorm. I think 5-4 was slightly better. Not necessarily in terms of rotation, but just in terms of smoothness. 5-4 didn't have all the problems that Fury does now with, Juggernaut, with Rampage, not scaling with haste properly. So I think 5-4 is slightly ahead just in terms of quality. Everything worked so much better together. And then, of course, the other gold standard for Fury is ICC Wrath, which I would actually argue it's a little bit of a rose-tinted glass, because if you go back and look, you can actually look at some logs. I have a few from Wrath, and it's ridiculous. I mean, you're literally, people joke about a 3-button rotation, but you're literally pressing 3 buttons the whole time. You're spamming Cleave or Heroic Strike, you're spamming Bloodthirst, and you're whirlwinding. It's really bad. And then you hit Battlecry occasionally. So it's a lot less involved, and there's none of the nuances that we have now. Now, of course, they did get a tier bonus that let them slam. And you could stance to try to rend, but that was
stance dancing.
It was. People look back, oh, it was so great because you could stance and apply rend, but very few warriors actually did that during Wrath.
I mean, you always look back at it, and you always, because it's usually when you started playing the game or you started playing the class, and it's all new to you. And when everything's new to you, it feels like it's the best time.
Yeah.
Once you're
Grass
jaded,
is always green.
Yeah, once you're jaded, and
I tried to play on a Wrath server one time, and it was just god awful. I can't get over
there's
all the
just so many quality
of
of life
now.
features. Yeah,
exactly.
Like, you go back and you're like, wow, how did I survive without these features now that I have them?
But to get back to the question, with the exception of certain things that don't quite work right, like Rampage, like Juggernaut, I think this is one of the best iterations of Fury they've ever had. I think my pure enjoyment of playing the rotation is one of the highest. I think 5-4 Fury beats it out slightly, but there are 2 factors which should be considered. As one, it was very short-lived. It was only the end of the expansion, 5.4, the last tier, that they actually got that right, because TOT Fury was, it was horrible. I hated it. And you also needed a lot of gear. I was actually the first warrior in the world who got crit capped, and I was one of the only warriors in the world who ever got crit capped in Siege of Orgrimmar. So the rotation was extremely smooth for me, but people who didn't have absolute best in slot gear never got there, so they didn't necessarily have the same outlook on the spec as I did. So while it worked really well at the high end, it did have some problems at the lower ends. And I think Fury now is probably one of the best iterations I've ever had. If they'd fix Juggernaut and fix Rampage, I'd be completely fine with it.
Sounds good. Cap?
So for me, I have a actually pretty limited background in WoW. I mean, I played all through Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King, but then I took a massive break in between. I took a break between Cataclysm all the way through the end of, like, the very end of WoD, right before Legion came out. So in terms of, like, actual raiding experience with Fury, I've only really gotten a taste of Wrath of the Lich King Fury and Legion Fury. And I will agree with Archie that, like, the ICC Fury was like a 3-button rotation. I enjoyed it. I mean, it was pretty fun pressing Whirlwind on single target and just, like, seeing all those crits go at once and, like, feel like you're actually doing something. But I don't know. I think compared to now, like, especially all throughout Nighthold, the Fury spec really grew on me, and I had a lot of fun learning the spec and, like, learning the timings of the cooldowns and all that and maximizing my damage. And I feel like with the tier bonus and with how the fights worked, like the whole thing kind of came together into like this one coherent picture, and it was really enjoyable to play, which is why I lament losing the tier 19 bonus, and I'm a little confused by the T20 bonuses and stuff like that. I think it's still really enjoyable. I love playing Fury. If Fury all of a sudden became, the god tier spec again, I'd be happy to go back and like play that for as long as it is.
Right.
But yeah. I don't know. I really enjoy Fury as it is in Legion right
There
now.
are two things that really make me enjoy Fury and Legion and call it one of the best, and one of them is the low cooldown on Battlecry.
Yeah.
I hate CDs with a stupidly long cooldown. I don't like Havoc, for example, for that reason. I like low cooldowns. I don't want to feel like if I mess up or have an ill time or just get an ability at the wrong time and don't use my CD or get a bad use of my CD, my damage is just dumpstered. I like Battlecry because I know I'm going to use it 5, 6, or 10 times in the encounter, so getting one bad use isn't the end of the world. I also like Fury being haste-driven more so than crit. While I do lament the loss of being crit-driven, especially for things like Bloodthirst, I think Bloodthirst critting is one of the worst things they've done with Fury in this iteration. I like being haste-driven because I like the Fury feel of your abilities just coming faster and faster as you get more gear.
I think the haste just makes every
Yeah.
spec feel very good. So it
I
feels
agree.
Yeah,
like
to a
this
degree.
is actually so good on Fury.
To a degree, but it doesn't really matter for arms so much because they're limited by rage generation. So if they don't have as much haste, it doesn't. If you play arms right now and you have a lot of haste or you have a little bit of haste, you can kind of feel the difference. But you're always going to have some free GCDs. So some of that haste is wasted. If you're playing Fury, it's actually GCD caps. You really notice a difference going from like 20 to 30% haste.
Right. And to answer that question for myself, I feel like this iteration of Fury is probably my favorite one out of them all. But mind you, when I was playing the game back in Kata and Mop, I wasn't as knowledgeable of the game. So, um, the way I looked at the game was completely different to how I look at it now. So I understand the game more now, which makes me feel like I can appreciate Fury more now than I could before. So that's why I feel like maybe Fury right now, besides it being extremely fun and extremely smooth and satisfying to play, I just feel like me understanding the game more now since I'm more mature and I've been playing the game longer now finally, it just makes me appreciate the spec more. So I do feel like this is my favorite iteration of Fury. Maybe my favorite iteration of Fury was back in MOP, but from my memory and from my perspective and what I did in MOP, it didn't feel like it was, and I definitely do like the Legion one a ton more. So it's quite interesting that I'm actually just so happy that Fury is actually just such in a good state, and Arms is slowly getting in there too as well.
I love the arms revamp. I haven't been
Yeah.
playing ARMS, so people won't believe me when I say that, but I think this revamp of ARMS they've given is one of the best they've done since the 5.4 also revamped ARMS. And yeah, it's just, I hated Focus Rage,
I think
and
everyone did.
I love how smoothly ARMS plays out, and that's what makes Fury good now in relation to 5.4. 5.4 was great if you had the gear for it, but it was centered on those burst windows of CS, and there were a lot of problems with it. There were a lot of ways for it to go wrong, like your CS gets parried, or you CS and you have to move out of range, or whatever. You kind of have that feeling now with Battlecry, but I don't know. It doesn't hit me the same way because you had to set up a lot of things to make the 5.4 rotation work. You had to double stack your Raging Blow stacks to go in to prepare for CS. You had to get Stormbolt off cooldown. It wasn't as easy as people like to remember it was. There was a lot more maintenance. You had to pool rage for your heroic strikes, unless, like me, you were crit capped and you just had all the rage in the world.
Well, for some people that's fun for them though. The whole
Yeah.
having to set it up correctly and being someone who
Yeah,
can
of
set it
course.
up correctly.
I think what really makes Fury excel right now, though, is just that it's so easily accessible, and that's what ARMS, the talent revamp it has done for ARMS. It's made it very accessible. You don't need to figure out how to best maintain Frothing Berserker. All you really have to do is know how to use Colossus Smash, Mortal Strike, and Whirlwind, or, Rend as the case may be.
Yeah.
And it's made it a lot more accessible, and Fury now is very cyclic. Yeah, you press 3 buttons most of the time, and, you inject Rampage into the rotation, but it's a very cyclic rotation. It keeps on repeating itself, and that makes it approachable, easily understandable, and easy to play.
Right. So I think that wraps up that question. And going into the next question, we have 2 more. This one is sort of a 2-part question. And the first part of the question is, will heroicstrike.org ever turn into an actual forum for Warriors? And for those of you that don't know, heroicstrike.org is sort of like a tribute website that I believe Archie, you and alongside, was it Sorry
Yeah.
also that assisted you in buying the domain?
No. Heroicstrike.org is kind of a funny story. That site was made by myself, Collision, and another warrior named Manager, who is now gone to playing a monk, so we won't talk about him anymore.
He's exiled.
Yeah, pretty much. He self-imposed exile. So it was back in the Warlords of Draenor Alpha, and we were really happy. We were riding the high from Mists of Pandaria, from the 5.4 Fury that we were just singing the praises of, and we didn't want anything changed. Like a few little minor tweaks, and we'd been tweeting with devs and talking and theory crafting and talking on the alpha forums, stuff like that, saying, hey, we love where Fury is at. You could fix up this and that. There were a few things, like we wanted Meat Cleaver to work a little bit better. And there was a tweet there were 2 tweets. There was a tweet from Ghostcrawler and a tweet from Celestalon that both said, basically, we like how Fury works right now and don't have any plans to change anything. One of them was like, we want to make haste more impactful, but that's about it. And we were like, hey, cool, we're going into Warlords strong. And then, like 2 weeks later, or a month later, they just changed everything. They removed Heroic Strike. Then they removed Colossus Smash, and just everything. Like our world started crumbling around us. And it was the removal of Heroic Strike that really kind of defeated us, and we got really upset. So we made a website, heroicstrike.org, and we just put on the saddest music we could find.
It's that puppy music from those commercials.
Yeah, it's Sarah McLachlan from the Adopt a Pet commercials, and we just put up screenshots of Heroic Strike, like people with their bars filled with nothing but Heroic Strike. The Heroic Strike, it wasn't Hearthstone at the time, it was a WoW TCG card. It's just anything we could find with Heroic Strike, and just put them on a slideshow. And in one of them, you see a picture of myself, Collision, and Manager crying on a hilltop in Winter Spring. And we took that because in a previous AMA or something, Celestalon had talked about how his favorite place to test new changes was Winter Spring. Because it was this nice, quiet area that like no other players were ever in. He just really liked the scenery. So we went up there and found a hilltop and took a picture of 3 warriors crying up there.
Everywhere.
Yeah, that was specifically for him. And I don't know if they ever caught that, but it was funny because we made this website. It blew up bigger than we ever thought it would. I actually made an infographic, and I'll have to show y'all that later on how many hits and stuff. We got an absurd number of hits, like 200,000 hits in the first 5 hours it was up. And a lot of them came from Irvine, where Blizzard is headquartered. And I actually went to Blizzard for a tour. It was prearranged before heroicstrike.org was ever a thing, but I went there for a tour, and I met a few of the people on the class design team, and I was like, oh yeah, you saw that website, that was mine. And they just give me this look like, you motherfucker. I was like, sorry.
Yeah, it's, for those of you watching right now, heroicstrike.org is still online. You can actually go and check it out.
And I will point out, there is a pet adoption link below the video. And we actually did see a rise in pet adoptions the month that website first went up.
Look at that. Warriors helping out little lost puppies and cats.
Yeah, so visit heroicstrike.org and adopt a puppy.
Mm-hmm. And so the second part of that question was, so to reiterate, the first part of the question was, will heroicstrike.org ever turn into an actual forum for Warriors? Or, there's the second part of the question, has Discord basically made such class sites obsolete? So when we're talking about class sites, we're talking about how mages have their altar time forums, monks have their, I believe it's called Peak of Serenity forums. You know, rogues have their Raven Hold or whatever forums. Um, so with you owning heroicstrike.org, have you ever had any ideas to turn it into an actual forum to host guides, or do you actually think that Discord has just made forum communication very obsolete due to just how quick it is to communicate on Discord now, and really all you need to do is just make a post once in a while here on a forum, just so you can use it as a I guess as an anchor point, because on Discord you can't really do it. Discord's more for communicating with people instantly, while I guess
Mhm.
forums are more for displaying information, displaying guides, providing
Well,
information.
I don't know. I'm torn. On the one hand, I've always been derisive of discords because I feel like it's really easy for discords just to turn into a circle jerk with a lot of people just asking the same questions over and over again. It doesn't matter how good your pens are if nobody's looking at them. And if one spec is good or one spec is suddenly tuned to be bad, it just, like I said, it becomes a circle jerk of everybody either bemoaning what's happened to them or, every other spec is bad now. I have to go arms. How do I go arms, guys? So on the one hand, Discord's kind of undermined forums. People like the ability to get the instantaneous gratification, the instant answer to their question. But like you said, it doesn't work as a good host for things like guides. You still need it to Google Docs or a forum link. Personally, I've always used the MMO Champion forums. That's where most of us, after at least Jerks kind of crumbled, we all went to the MMO Champion forums, and that's where I really started putting up all my guides in Kata and in MOP. And we turned. I know MMO Champion forums get a lot of derision for other specs, but the Warrior forum there is quite good. And it's because, Sari is the moderator there. I write all the guides there. We had other really good warriors who were always helpful there. Collision was there. That's actually where I met Collision and Warrior Sari, and another warrior named Illyria, who used to be another helpful theory crafter. So turning heroicstrike.org into a forum seems kind of redundant from that perspective. We already have a good forum. We already have the Discord. I don't really see if there's a point. While I do like forums a little bit better than Discords because I feel like they encourage people to look up the answer before just asking the question, which Discords it's so easy to ask the question. They'll just do that instead of looking at the pens or whatever. I don't really see a niche that it holds. Maybe someday if something changes on the WoW or the MMO Champion forums, or if we need a better way to host and share information, I'll look at doing something more with Heroic Strike. And I have toyed with the idea of making it a blog or a forum or something for many years, but the need has just never arisen.
Right. Okay. That makes perfect sense. And I mean that's something I agree with too, really. I think really just MMO fills that gap that Discord doesn't fill itself. So it feels better, in my view at least, to just
Yeah.
leave Heroic Strike as a tribute website and keep it
Yeah.
there.
I feel like both forums and Discords have good sides and bad sides. But when we already have a very well working forum with a large outreach, one of the nice things about an MMO Champion is people go there for a lot more than just the forums. So it reaches a much wider audience than a class website necessarily will, at least without a lot of time to build it up. Even now, you have a lot of people who don't know about the Warrior Discord. And they come in, it's like, oh, hey, I just found out this existed, even though, we've had it around for over an expansion now.
Yeah, even though there's like 50,000 people on it too.
I mean, I still get people that said, hey, I just saw your guides. I never knew your guides existed, even though my guides are hosted on 3 different websites. So having a larger outreach helps, whereas having a heroicstrike.org as the one place with all the information wouldn't necessarily reach a lot of people who only go on Wowhead or, what have you.
Right. All right. So I think that's a very solid answer to that question. This is the final question, the finale, and we're gonna start with Cap on this one, to see how much of a warrior you really are. And the question is, do all good warriors have beards?
Uh, that's, I mean, I I know like a lot of warriors are like, big burly men, like, have like beards and very mannish looks. I'm like a fucking tiny like manlet dude with like I like a baby face, like I'm clean shaven, like I don't know, I'm like the polar opposite of what you'd expect a warrior to look like. So I guess I mean then again I'm not a good warrior. So the question
I was
still
about to say, keep in mind, he said good warriors, not all
yeah.
warriors.
Yeah, that's
Well,
the
I mean, to be
operative word
fair
there.
though, starting off, to be fair, you did just get back into the game and playing warrior again. Archie over here, if you go back and you look at his interviews on YouTube, someone here didn't have a beard either.
Well,
Well,
see, there's a big difference there. See, I didn't always have a beard, and it's actually funny you bring that up because I show people pictures of what I used to look like before I had a
You're a
beard,
baby face.
and nobody will believe it was me. Nobody believes it's the same person. But I was also in the military, so I couldn't have a beard. So it was a very real reason for that.
Personally, I don't have a beard. But I
Some
guess,
warriors wear their beards on the inside, I guess.
yeah,
We'll
that's
get them a
me.
You know
Good-
what?
that's a
You
good
know
way
what,
to put it.
Capcake? We'll get you a merkin.
I don't know. I've tried growing a beard, and it just, oh man, my girlfriend gets irritated at it. First off, she just gets annoyed. She's like, "Oh, you have this thing on your face, and it's like prickly, and it's annoying, and
See, you gotta you gotta oil it, man. You oil it.
gotta
It's
oil
nice and
it?
soft. Yeah, you oil your
Okay,
beard.
well the thing is,
My beard smells like a cedar wood fire, man. I wake up in the morning and I smell my beard and I feel like a man. You know?
well the thing is, like I started growing it, and it looks like I'm growing just pubes on my face, right? I'm walking around with like pubes on my face, and I look ridiculous. I look like so unclean.
Well, you'll grow up someday, Pinocchio.
Okay, Archie. Okay, old man. Maybe I just gotta be older and start growing the beard done. Once I get in my late
Yeah.
20s.
Every couple of months, I'll test out how well I can grow a beard, and every couple of months, I get reminded that it's just
Same.
a futile exercise.
That's me. I just go. It's what was that saying that like doing something once is fine, but like doing it again and expecting a different outcome
Yeah,
makes you
The
definition
start
definition of
whatever.
insanity is
Yeah,
doing
there-
something over and over again and expecting different results.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
literally me. Like I'll grow it
Till
for,
I
like-
learned there was only one real warrior in this Skyhold Talks.
It's inside, okay? It's in my heart.
Yeah.
That's all that
Well,
matters.
You two and Courageo can go start your own class.
Sorry, can too.
The no beard class.
We're gonna include Sorry in there. He'll be the main professor.
Sorry can just take that mop off his head and wear it as a beard.
Oh boy. Well, I think this is a really good show. Really appreciated you guys, especially. I mean, we're reaching the 2 hour mark, so this is quite a content-filled show with some very good points, and I really liked the way we went ahead with this. So I just want to let you guys, self-promote yourselves, and we'll start with Cap, and just tell them where the viewers can find you, your guild, social media, anything else you might want to say.
Yeah, so first off, I want to just thank you for having me on the show. I haven't really done anything like this before, and I'm still relatively new to the rating scene, so I really appreciate this opportunity to be on here and just say a bunch of dumb stuff. You can catch me on twitch.tv/Capcake. BigDumbGuild.com is my guild's website. It's like really good. Our GM is fucking great at making websites, so check it out if you want to catch all the news about Big Dumb Guild and keep up with our mythic progression race. And yeah, that's about it for me.
Archie?
Well, once again, I'm Archimtiros. You can find me on Twitter at twitter.com/Archimtiros, and I stream all of our mythic raids and occasionally other dumb stuff at twitch.tv/Archivision.
And you just got your sub
Some-
button too. Congrats on that.
Yes, I have a sub button. You can come be my sub, Naeno, anytime.
Tacos. Or
That's
no,
what
not
pe-
tacos, burritos. Ooh, sorry.
Yes, burritos. There's a big difference. Tacos are just shitty burritos. Like that's all there really is to it. They're just shitty, crunchy burritos. And don't even talk about soft tacos, because soft tacos are just unfolded burritos. Like, come on.
You have a YouTube channel too that you need to
I
start
do have a
actually doing
YouTube.
something with.
I need to put up some more stuff on YouTube, but for now, you can catch most of my content on the stream. And I also write guides on MMO Champion, Icy Veins, and Wowhead. Basically, if you've ever read a guide on the internet about warriors, I probably wrote it. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, and
Yeah.
obviously, oh, you have something else to say?
No, you go.
Oh, okay. Well, and
You know,
I'm
no
obviously
beard
Naeno.
having motherfucker.
Yep, that's me. No beard. I'm Naeno. You probably saw me on Final Boss, or well, you saw my character on Final Boss because someone here doesn't have a webcam.
Or beard.
So I mean that's about it really. You could catch me on just on Skyhold on the Skyhold Discord or on Twitch /Naeno Live. Obviously you can catch all of us actually on the Skyhold Discord. Archie and I are on the top right side under Valkyrie. Well, I'm under Valkyrie. He's under Theory Crafter. You can also catch Capcake there. He posts once in a while, and we're always free for PMs and stuff as long as you know you're not just bombarding us and answering some very, very basic questions. But besides that, just, farewell. We can all say goodbye to the viewers before we get some self-promotion going up in here about Skyhold.
Alright, thanks for having me, guys.
Grow a beard, you filthy children.
Anyhow, guys, I would like to thank you all for watching. This was only episode 2 of Skyhold Talks, so there are improvements that we are making with the show. We learned a bit from episode 1, and we're surely going to learn a lot more from episode 2. Besides that, I'd like to promote the Skyhold Discord, which is the official Warrior Class Discord server. We are partnered with Discord, so all you have to do to join is type in Skyhold when adding in a new server in your Discord client, or by visiting discord.gg/Skyhold. There, you can find all the latest up-to-date theory crafting information you could possibly need, along with being able to discuss said information with other players. We also have a Skyhold Talks Discord, where you viewers can suggest ideas and improvements we can implement to the show. Link for that Discord server will be in the description among other various links. Now, episode 3 will be the ARMS show, and we'll be having a very interesting lineup of guests on there, so if you wish to know a bit more about ARMS and its newest changes, then do make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned. I want to thank you all for watching, and a big thank you to the guest once more. I hope you all had as good of a time as we did recording it. And on that note, Skyhold Talks episode 2, The Furious Show, is now a wrap.